My name is Anita Gross, and I'm here to conduct the interview. Today is June 6, 1998. We're at the Holiday Inn by the National Airport in Washington, D.C. And we're continuing an interview which was originally started on November 10th, 1995, tape number 95 FLB1. Okay, could you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Ernest Goodman, and I come from the city of Breslau, now named Wrocław, now in Poland. It was in Germany when I left, and when I left, it was August the 21st, 1939. I arrived in England in 1939, the 23rd of August. So just say 8 days before World War II began.
And how old were you at that time?
I was 14.
And what is your birth date?
The birth date is the 22nd of February, 1925.
Okay. Did you travel alone or with anybody you knew? Or?
I didn't know anybody, but I traveled by train. My mother took me to the railroad station, and I traveled with a number of children from Breslau, and we arrived in Berlin late at night on the 22nd of August 1939, and the next morning we spent the night in an orphanage. Then the next morning we walked to the station and got on a train to Holland and eventually England.
When you went to the station, you mentioned it was just your mother. Where was your father?
My father had already left.
And where did he go?
He went to England and from there to Canada.
And when was that? When did he leave?
I'm not quite sure.
Was it quite some time before you went?
It was probably a year earlier. And
just so we have a record again, what were your parents' names?
Their names were Goodman, Guttmann. My father's name was Herbert, and my mother's name was Rose. She was born as Rose Wagner, W-A-G-N-E-R.
Did you ever see your father again?
No, I did not. I did not. There were family circumstances, divorce and so on, that I never saw him again.
And your mother, did she survive the war?
Yes, she did. She escaped to Italy during the war, sometime in 1941. It was a very exciting story. I don't know all the details yet, and I never will because she's dead. But she went to Italy, and from there she took a boat to the Panama Canal, and from there to Bolivia, where she found work and survived the war.
And did you reunite with your mother?
Yes, I did. She came to England in 1950 when we were first met again. And then we came to the United States in 1953, and she had meanwhile emigrated to the United States, so we met up again. So a very happy reunion.
Now, we'll just go back just a little bit. When you arrived in England, did you know where you were going to go, or what were the circumstances of your arrival?
The circumstances were very strange and very chaotic. I remember Liverpool Street Station, railway station, first stop for all the members of the Kinder Transport. And we lined up at a table, and I was given a number. I was 14, not easy to adopt. I mean, I was approaching manhood at 14. And so people really didn't want to adopt 14-year-olds. At least that was my impression. It's all right, I really didn't want to be adopted. But I was given a piece of paper, and the name on it was Bernard Brown, and there was a telephone number. And under the telephone number it said YMCA, Great Russell Street, London. I made a call to Bernard Brown in very bad English. I had really very, very little English, although I'd learned it in school for 3.5 years. I hardly knew anything but the weather. It's warm today, the sun is out, and the post office is over there, and stuff like that. It didn't help me much. So I called, and it didn't make very much sense. I simply went there and met Mr. Brown, and Mr. Brown told me that they would sponsor me, which meant that the YMCA would put me in a hostel for about 4 or 5 weeks. And after that, they will place me on a farm to work for a farmer. And he pressed my hands very hard, and he said, press, press, press. He wanted to see how strong I was. Could I milk? Could I do farm work? And he was satisfied that I could. And the next morning, I found myself on a train to Derby, in the sort of Midlands of England. And at the station in Derby, I was given a voucher, and this voucher on the train was a comedy really in many ways, how I communicated. But at the station in Derby there was a man who introduced himself as Mr. Greenwood, and Mr. Greenwood took me in a car. I carried my suitcase. We had one suitcase, of course, couldn't have more than one suitcase. And I took this heavy suitcase to his car, and he drove me to Park Hill, which became a hostel. There were quite a few refugees. Park Hill, Eggington, near Derby. Park Hill. Another hostel where they put refugees, the YMCA, was Flint Hall. Flint Hall. I just met several people at our conference who had been to Flint Hall near Henley-on-Thames. So I was taken to Park Hill by Mr. Greenwood and found that there were a few refugees and also a few English boys. The organization was called British Boys for British Farms. British Boys for British Farms. And there we were to be trained for land work, to be placed on a farm later, as I was. Although there's a slight detour. I hurt my ankle. The boots were very, very rough, and I simply wasn't used to wearing very, very tough leather boots. And several boys had trouble. I had very, very much trouble. So they couldn't at that time place me on a farm. So they sent me to a refugee hostel at Barham House. Famous refugee hostel, hundreds of boys, hundreds of boys.
Barham House, and where's that located?
That is located in Claydon, near Ipswich. Claydon, near Ipswich. And there I was put into the sick bay because the foot was in very, very bad shape. And it took about 2 weeks to heal it with different sulfur powder and stuff. There was no penicillin in those days. So they did take care of it, and after about 4 weeks at Barham House altogether, learned to have cold showers and things of that nature. And it was a rough camp. And after that, I went to Flint Hall, the other YMCA hostel. I'm going into great detail here, but anyway, at that hostel I stayed about 4 weeks, did some more training, although we didn't really learn that much, but eventually I was placed on a farm in Petersfield, Hampshire, and there I worked for quite a long time.
Now, what was the nature of the training they gave you?
Very little, really. We worked in the fields. there were a few cows, and they put a few of us under the cows and made us milk, because it was all hand milking in those days. Very few people had milking machines. So we messed around there and started to milk. We didn't learn much, really didn't. But we were there and learned to rough it. It was a pretty rough life. And somebody just wrote a book about this whole situation, The British Boys for British Farms. The author is Barbara Vesey, and in fact we write to each other. She said, I wish I'd met you because I could have written a great deal about the refugees. The only thing she said about the refugees is that many of them were failures. That is to say, they didn't become land workers.
For
they
what
went
reason?
to school, they went to different other things.
Oh.
Although I did work on the land for a long time. I was on the farm in near Petersfield for a long time, and then from there I went to another farm and worked there for quite a long time. It was a very lonely life. I mean, it was the only refugee.
Oh, so you're separated from the other refugees?
Oh yes, yes, yes. Oh, totally on our own. I was totally on my own and worked 16 hours a day in the summer. Very hard work, very hard work.
Were you given any English training at the time?
No, no. But you learned it, you know, talking to the farmers, and it was a certain type of English. And then eventually I was extremely lonely some of the time, totally on my own, you know, sitting in the evening and so on, and talking to the cows frequently in the cow barn. But so I decided that I would go to the Buckinghamshire War Agricultural Executive Committee, because I understood that they had hostels from where they sent people out to farms to work, to cut sugar beet, to cut mangels, feed for cattle, pick up potatoes, ditch digging, weeds, dug ditches across fields in order to drain the fields so that they could be plowed. It was essential, supposedly essential for war work, but I always had suspicions that it was make work stuff. So, but anyway, I went to that hostel where we were more, where it was less lonely because there were other refugees there. And I met many from Vienna, and some from Czechoslovakia, some from Germany, and it was a good life. We went out together, working on farms.
And so then you were able to speak German with these refugees?
Spoke some German, some had practically forgotten it all. But we talked about things that interested us, and mutual support, gave each other a little mutual support, psychological.
So what year was that then when you went?
That was 41, 42. I was in those hostels, working out on farms. It was 41, 42, and into 43. It was probably more 42, 43. Really, because by 43 the bug had bitten me that I must join the army.
Now while you were working in these hostels, were you in communication with your mother?
I received, and I didn't know what had happened to her. I assumed that she'd been deported and that it was all over. I remember I was feeding the chickens, and I'd just come into the barn, and the mailman arrived on his bicycle. And he called to me, he saw me, and he said, you know, I think I have a letter for you. Unusual, isn't it? And I said, yes, it certainly is. I haven't had a letter in years. And that letter came from an uncle in America. And it said, you will be happy to know that your mother is safe, and she lives in Bolivia. And I was like paralyzed. I had to digest it somehow. She is alive in Bolivia, of all places. What's she doing there? He gave me her address. He said, I don't know whether the letter will ever get to her, but you can write through the Red Cross. And he gave me the Red Cross address. Well, cut a long story short, I wrote a letter which never got there. I wrote another one 4 or 5 months later, and that did get there. And I received a reply. And so I knew she was safe. I was worried about her, of course, but I knew she was safe.
Now, this was the first time you had heard from the uncle?
Yes.
And how did he find you?
Well, she wrote to him. I assume that America was not in the war yet. America didn't come into the war until the end of 41. And this must have been in 41. So from 39 to 41, I had no idea. I think I received this letter in the fall of 41.
Do you still have that letter?
No. I've often looked for it. I have a lot of things, and that letter I do not have. I don't know where it went.
Did you then at that point start any kind of relationship with this uncle?
Yes, I wrote to him, he wrote to me, and so that was, we had a relationship by correspondence. He had been to England earlier and went to the States. He was a physician.
Did you have any other relatives who had left?
My brother.
Your brother.
He worked on a farm in the Midlands somewhere, but it was difficult to get to each other. First of all, we didn't have any money. And secondly, you couldn't always get away, and it's rather difficult to travel during the war. It just wasn't easy. By train, you sometimes had to go to London to get back to the Midlands. By bus, it was just not possible. But we did write to each other from time to time. He left Germany early in 39. Directly, not Kindertransport, he went directly to a farm. How this was arranged, I don't know. Somebody obviously was pulling strings.
I just want to go back just briefly. Do you know how it was that you came to be on the Kindertransport?
No. When I first saw the people at the Jewish community area responsible for immigrants and immigration, I went there after school with a friend frequently, and we put our names down for Honduras, for Bolivia, for Cuba, for Chile, and they laughed at us. They took our names and laughed at us. And I said one day that I'd heard about the Kindertransport. He said, "What? I've never heard of that." And I knew that some children had already gone on it. That was in early 39.
Is that you knew because they were friends of yours?
Yes. They were friends who had suddenly disappeared, or they were about to leave. And I said to one lad, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, this is my last day at school, and I'm going to go in the Kindertransport." So I said, "You know, I ought to see about that." And he said, "Well, they're all full. They're all full." I remember that very well. They're all full. They're packed. And when I went to see them, actually the second time, they said, "Oh, yeah, Kindertransport. Yeah, that's all full. Forget about it." So I said, "Well, can you give me some indication where we might go, where we could go?" I mean, I wanted very much to go to Palestine, as it was then. I want to go to Hachshara, preparation for Palestine. I want to become a chalutz, you know, a pioneer. I was all gung-ho. But he said, "Oh, that's out of the question. You know, nobody goes there anymore." And Kindertransport, well, there's a long list. First he said he didn't know about it. Second time he said there's a long, long list, and he said, "You said no hope. There's no hope. There's a long list, and these transports are full already till the rest of the year." All I can tell you is that at the very beginning of August of 1939, I suddenly got a letter out of the blue that said, "You are going to join the Kindertransport." Well, my uncle who had been in London, had pulled some strings. He also found the £50. £50 had to be paid to the British government. He found the £50. I don't know whether he had it or what. He paid £50 to the government. This was, of course, for further immigration. And I received this letter that you are on the Kindertransport leaving Breslau on the 21st of August. I think I had less than 2 weeks. And be ready, and there were some instructions. I had to see a physician, to get a physical. But I don't remember very much else except that my mother started to hustle around to do some shopping. She said, you know, you're going to need things, and you can only take 1 suitcase, and you only have 10 marks, and what's going to happen, and so on. So suddenly I was on the Kindertransport.
Now, why was it, I mean, did your mother participate in also trying to find avenues for you to leave
Yes.
the country?
Yes, she did too. She did too. We did all we could.
Mm-hmm.
But there were so many rumors all the time. Shanghai has opened up. And everybody knew, you know, that meant you had to go somewhere, put your name down. I had my name down for probably a dozen countries at one point. Oh, she worked at it too, and so did we.
What was her reaction when you received the letter that you would be on the transport?
She, outwardly, she said, good. She said, I can't be happier. There were some tears. But my brother, of course, had left already, and she was terribly upset when he left. I remember we came back from the railroad station, and she threw herself on the bed and cried for 2 hours. Mm. I didn't feel good about that. And I figured then, now I'm leaving, what's going to happen? She said she's very, very happy, and I remember saying, you know, it'll be so much easier for you to find a place. Encumbered by a kid, it's going to be difficult for you. And if I've gone, you'll be going too, and I'll see you soon. And if not in England, then maybe later on. The war hadn't started yet. So maybe later on, maybe we'll meet somewhere, but we'll meet again and be much easier for you on your own.
Were you feeling that confident?
I don't remember. I guess I did.
It was a very adult thing to say.
Yes, but having seen her already, you know, after my brother left, and you know, at that time we were thinking all the time, thinking, what next? Where will we end up? Will the family ever be together again? You know, everybody had left, except my poor grandfather was left behind.
What about any cousins? Do you have any cousins there?
Yes, 2 perished in Auschwitz. They live just across the border in the province of Posen. And they were deported. I didn't, but an uncle in America received an SOS from them, a telegram. Save us. It said something to the effect that save us. Nothing could be done. I had a cousin in Cuba who went there together with his father, my uncle, and they later came to the United States. I had an uncle in Cuba. They'd all been to concentration camps, and they were let out only when they produced a visa to prove that they would leave the country within 2 weeks.
So that was prior to 39?
That was after Kristallnacht.
Oh.
That was probably December 38, January 39. They came back from the concentration camp sick, pneumonia, beaten, scars. They looked haunted.
And this was, did your family all live in an area together?
Yes, fairly close.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what were your uncles' names?
Uncles' names were Wagner. Mm-hmm. It was Arthur and Leo and Fred. Those were the 3 uncles. And they all did all right in the end.
And so you were able to meet up with them after the war as well?
Met up with them briefly. The one died, and the other one died fairly soon after that. And so we did meet, however. We sort of tried hard to establish some kind of family life again in Chicago. My mother had moved to Chicago. We came over from England. My brother stayed in England, is still there. But we all tried together in Chicago. It was never the same, of course. It was never the same. There were great interruptions. But we tried to become a family again. Tried to pick up the pieces. But it never really worked well.
And did they have children as well? Or?
Yes, they have. The one had a daughter. She is terribly sick with diabetes. The other one had a son, terribly, terribly sick with diabetes. And the other one had a son, one each. One son, one daughter. And the other son was all right. He was in good shape, died just quite recently in White Plains, New York.
So you were in contact with some of these family members?
Yes. We did take up again and sort of try to make up for lost time. I must say I was happy to be able to introduce my children to them, briefly at least. They got to know them. But I have no family left, except for my brother in England. But so they did meet some of them. But it was a heartbreaking thing. In my daughter's wedding 6 years ago, hardly any of my relatives there. Nobody really.
Now, I'm sorry to jump around again, but I wanted to ask you, when you were, during the period when you were at the hostels and doing the farm work and that sort of thing, were you reading at all? Did you carry on any sort of intellectual stimulation, or?
I was always something of a reader, and I tried hard to read a newspaper. If not every day, then at least every other day or so. In England, I got the Daily Express. I found it easy to read it. And how I got it, I don't quite remember, but I did try to read the Daily Express. Very soon, I borrowed books at a lending library, although it meant quite a walk to the lending library, but I looked around and I started to read some of the old whodunits, the Baroness Orczy, an English whodunit writer, Warwick Deeping, whom I really don't like very much. But he, there were some books there, and I started to read them with a dictionary. I tried hard to read.
So,
although candlelight, by candlelight.
There was no electricity where you were?
No electricity, none. We had spirit lamps. What do they call them?
Gas lamps? I don't know what they call them.
They weren't gas, but the fluid.
Yeah.
Okay. And by that, or I found candles.
Lanterns.
Yes, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I found that candlelight was really the best. I had 2 candles, one each side of the book. But it wasn't easy.
Did they have running water, or was it?
Yes, there was water. In the beginning, you washed outside, outdoors, only outdoors. Went outside the back door and washed there. I brushed my teeth with icy cold water. The farmers, the people I lodged with were amazed. They'd never seen a toothbrush. And they watched me in awe. And I suspect they used the toothbrush behind my back, probably.
And so the toilet, was it an outhouse also?
Yes, outhouse. Yes, buckets.
Buckets.
Buckets. Rather large buckets.
And were you responsible for maintaining the...
No, the cowman used to take that and dump it in the ditch somewhere as soon as it was full.
So what happened, you were at Peter's Field, and then what happened at that point?
Well, the farmer, this was a gentleman farm. I don't want to mention his name, but he owned much of the land in the area. And he paid us 5 shillings a week. He paid, you know, the farm boys. I actually was the only one on that particular farm, and the only refugee. And he paid me 5 shillings a week. Then when farming was considered to be essential, they had to pay more between the unions and the government and so on. They agreed that farm workers must be paid well. So my salary went up from 5 shillings to 17 shillings.
Wow.
At that point he said, I can no longer afford to keep boys. I can keep the cowman and the second cowman, but we have to make do without. He did not feed the cattle very well, did not make much milk, didn't make much money out of the farm. So the YMCA was called, pick him up. This was after about 18 months or so. Pick him up, we can't afford to keep him any longer, because he had to pay 30 shillings to the cowman to house me and feed me too, which was, he said, too much. I just don't have that money. He did, but he didn't. So I was sent to another farm, again in Hampshire, North Hampshire, in Fleet. It was another farm. And there I worked until one day I said to the farmer that I've decided to leave and go to a War Agricultural Executive Committee hostel. I just sort of told him that. And he said, well, you can't do that. You are supposed to be here, and you know what we can do with people like you. Internment. And for special emphasis, he repeated the word internment. And I thought, well, you know, I doubt that very much. I will pack my suitcase. And I told him that, I forget what it was, in about 4 days, 5 days, I said, I'm leaving. And I'm going to Princess Risborough, where there was this hostel. Princess Risborough in Buckinghamshire. And I left and went there, and there, of course, full of Viennese and full of Germans and so on, and it was very different. It was still hard work, but it was very different.
Now, it sounds like you were not under the control of the Jewish Refugee Committee.
They claim I was, but I was never visited. They made it, I assume they made a phone call to the farmer, who said all is well, he's all right, he's okay, he's all right. A vicar. They didn't have enough social workers. The Jewish refugee organizations, they were all drafted, all the social workers. And so they asked some minister or other, check on this refugee. I have the records, actually. You know, I got them from the
CBC? Or?
Yes, and so they sent them to me. And one very interesting notation says, I have it actually in my room. It says, should be visited because we understand that he goes to the Baptist church with a farmer. Check this out. I think Mr. Lasky, Neville Lasky, had looked through the records. What happened was that sometimes on Sunday night they had socials, and there was good food. And the farmer would say, you know, we have a social tonight, and will you come? And I used to love it because there was food there, and then you know, they played some music and so on, and I went along with them. It was a change of pace, change of scenery, and that was it. So when they called him and asked, you know, what about his religion? He said, well, you know, he comes to the Baptist church, he's all right. And there, the Jewish organization, the Central Fund, they said, you know, that he should be, look into this. I don't think anybody ever did. They were short of people.
What type of food were you eating aside from at the socials? What was your typical?
The food was.
Oops. Okay, so we're resuming now. We were talking about what your main food was during that period when you were working still in the hospital.
Well, it was good British food, somewhat strange to me. Steam puddings, we didn't know that at all, but I got to love it in the end, and now, of course, I absolutely adore it. A steam pudding with custard, I don't think there's any better dessert in the world. So, apple pie, all the usual porridge for breakfast, bacon, and that was difficult in the beginning because I'd been brought up kosher, but before long I accepted it because it was very, very important to eat well. And so there was bacon usually for breakfast, or ham, and it was just the usual English fare, quite wholesome.
So you felt that you were pretty well nourished?
Pretty well nourished much of the time. It depended where I was. Mm-hmm. There were times when things were not so good, but on the farm it was very good.
So you said you were kosher before, and had you maintained any religious practices after you got to England?
After I arrived in England? Mm-hmm. No. No. The first high holidays, some people showed up from Derby, I think, and they were rather poor people. They took us to synagogue, and then they fed us, but they had very little. They really didn't eat, they gave it to us. Mm.
You say us, there were others involved?
Yes, they took some others from the hostel. They took, I think there were 5 or 6 of us that went to the same house, actually. Mm. And at one time, there were just 2 of us taken to a particular house. The man was a tailor working for a large store, and he really had very little. And they kept feeding us, but I didn't see them eat.
And this only happened one of the...
That happened once. I don't think I went anywhere after that at all.
Mm-hmm. Now you have some pictures from that period when you were in the hostels?
Well, this was soon after I arrived, probably the 2nd or 3rd day. That's at Park Hill. In Derbyshire.
Now, why was this photograph taken?
A friend took it. He had a box camera, and he wanted to take a picture of his friends, and so he said, sit on the paddock, and we'll take a picture of you.
And what was your friend's name?
I don't remember. But I had special issue sneakers, without laces. They didn't have laces. We were never given laces, but I went, after a few weeks, I made enough money to buy some shoelaces, and I got those. And the other picture was taken probably 6 months later, and you can see the badge, the YMCA badge.
And this was taken by whom?
British Boys for British Farms. This was taken by a professional photographer. Somebody sent me. I'm not sure who it was. Wanted me to have a picture taken. And so I did, but I cannot tell you all the details. I'm shocked sometimes to look at it because I don't remember who did it, who had me have that photograph taken.
Do you remember having a jacket like that?
Yes. Yes, I had a jacket that was getting smaller and smaller.
And that was one you had brought with you from home?
I brought it with me, and it was in the top of the suitcase. And I put it on, and there already it's a little tight, and it got tighter and tighter. I think within a year I had to give it away.
Were you able to use many of your clothes that you had brought with you?
No, I couldn't. I grew out very quickly with farm work. Mm-hmm. I grew wider, taller, pretty quickly. And I couldn't use a lot of them, but it's always difficult to buy them, however. Went to Marks and Spencer in Petersfield once, I remember, bought some socks, I bought some underwear, and I bought, I think I bought a shirt or was it trousers, maybe the trousers a little later, but that's a little faint now.
Did you bring any memorabilia with you from home?
Yes, I brought a, unfortunately I don't have it here, but I think in the earlier part I showed you that photograph album that I treasured so much. It's a little album that was given to me by a school friend at my bar mitzvah. She sat in the top tiers of the synagogue, the women sat, and when we came out, she gave that to me in a box. And I still have it, and I treasured it because in it I had pictures of my mother, my brother, little cousin, and a number of others. Vacation pictures that I treasured and looked through every now and then. It sustained me greatly, greatly. I never forgot it. It's now lying on my desk. And I think we have a picture of it.
Yeah, I think so.
In the earlier part.
Now, we had spoken just briefly before about whether or not the Jewish Refugee Committee was involved in your stay there in England. And you brought with you some papers that you had just recently acquired?
Yes, I recently acquired these. And they're not very satisfactory. The dates are wrong. They're very mixed up. And
how were you able to obtain this?
I wrote to the Central British Fund, and they told me that yes, they had them, indeed they did have them, and that they would be glad to send them to me if I send them, I forget exactly the amount.
I don't remember.
$30, whatever. I said, well, I'm coming to England next year and I'll have enough patience to wait. And I'll be in to pick them up. And I went in, picked them up, and they said, you don't owe us anything unless you want to give us a donation. We do need donation because children in Bosnia and different places. So I did make a donation and they gave me these. And
do you want to just, before you read anything from them, do you want to sort of hold up so we can just kind of see what the forms looked like?
There's page 1,
okay.
Page 2.
Now, as far as you know, you knew nothing really about this until you received these forms. You didn't know that there was this kind of maintenance or anything like that, or quote continued interest of any sort.
It says here 17th, 12th, 41. Miss Tilling asked to visit boy to find out whether he would like to move to a youth group where he could have Jewish contacts. I was never asked. I was never contacted. I know I was never contacted because I would have jumped at the opportunity. I was on my own on a farm, and this never happened. I'm sorry, it just didn't happen.
What other sorts of entries do they have there?
Well, another very interesting thing is after I joined the army, they're talking about what about appointing a guardian, and really that Lord Gorell is the guardian of all of us, every kind. They talking about guardians. I was 22 years old, I'd been to hell and back, I'd been wounded, I was in the hospital for 7 months, and here they talk about appointing a guardian. I never quite understood that. So I'm not being critical of the refugee committee. I can only say that they never saw me and I never saw them. I'm extremely thankful to Bloomsbury House because I did get a coat from them. I needed a winter coat very, very badly. I did not bring one from Germany. There wasn't room in the suitcase really, and I just didn't have one. Mm-hmm. Not warm enough to work on the farm. So I went to Bloomsbury House and got myself a coat. Unfortunately, it was extremely elegant. It must have been donated by a very wealthy person with real silk lining. To work on the farm, it was nice and warm, little incongruous, but I appreciated it. They asked me, do you need a scarf? No, I had a scarf. And so it was good to get that coat. Mm-hmm. So the refugee committee was okay from that point of view.
Now you were involved and you went to the hostel with the War Agricultural Committee. What happened at that point in your life? You said you started getting this bug to join up.
Yes, well, first of all, because I've worked there with friends, I made friends very quickly at this hostel. We had a great time. I began to live. You know, a 16-year-old. You're beginning to get ideas about having a good time. You want to go to a dance, maybe. You want to go to the movies. We were paid very little, but a little more than the farm paid. And so it was quite a good life there. Talking to friends in the ditch, and while hedging, you know, cutting down hedges so that those fields could be plowed, and doing all kinds of other farm work, and with others, friends you could talk to. You didn't only have to use the imagination, you could, you know, give it free vent. And started to get a little interest in girls. You know, land girls, the Women's Land Army. They were out there with us some of the time, and we, you know, started to flirt around a little bit. It was nice, it was new, different. So that was okay. Thought I would take some girls to the pictures, do some magnificent wartime pictures, romance. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful pictures, well made. And those sustained us again, and before long I thought, you know, everybody's wearing a uniform. I should too. It's our war. We should get involved. So
was that a discussion among the group of you?
Yes, from time to time. Mm-hmm. And some said, no, never, no, I'm not going, I'm doing war work, and I don't think I'm going to go, I'm not suitable, I'm not this, I'm not that. Some may not have been fit enough, I don't know.
And your Zionist aspirations at this point, what were they?
Well, the Zionist aspiration had flagged by then, because I had no opportunity really to be in contact with them any longer. I would gladly have gone to Palestine if it had been possible, but really wasn't at that time. So I sort of thought I was going to live in England forever. Mm-hmm. I was quite ready to. I started to like the country very much, to love the country very much, became integrated quite a bit, talked blimey like the rest of them, and had a wonderful time. Went to the pub with the cowmen, you know, and we had a good time. Later on, with the lads in the agricultural hostels, you know, we were pretty much English, and every now and then went to London, where we saw, of course, all these uniforms. The whole country was a troop carrier.
Oh, hold on a second. Okay, go ahead. So at this point then you felt that it was time for you to start looking into that.
Yes. Started to look, and as I say, rarely a day went by without my thinking about joining up. And I wasn't sure which service. At 17 I went to the recruiting office in Northampton because I was in Newport Pagnell at that time, the hostel there. And I asked them about the RAF. And I could see myself flying off as a kite, you know, and chasing around and so on. They said, well, look, all the training facilities are packed full. There's nothing open. In any case, you are not old enough, are you? And I said, well, I'm almost 18. But they didn't buy it. They said, well, do you have any proof? I said, no, I don't have a proof. I'm actually 17, but I'll soon be 18. So they said, well, why don't you come back when you're 18? And so I did. And I asked a friend of mine, what do you think about it? He said, absolutely. He said, yes, we ought to go, we ought to go. And so the two of us went. And before long, we were in Glasgow.
And you went to where, the Royal Air Force?
No. They said, well, no, don't go to the Air Force because it's really the training facilities are packed full. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't know where to send you at the present time. So they said, what about the Army? I mean, cannon fodder is always needed. So I said, that'll do. Good enough. Yes. And they said, well, we'll send you to Glasgow for basic training. You'll hear from us soon. And then you can decide what you want to do. You can go to the engineers, you can go in the artillery, you can go in the tanks, whatever you decide and whatever your aptitude is. They'll test your aptitude. So I found myself in Glasgow. We did our basic training. It was cold. Maryhill Barracks. It was cold. But it was good. It was great. Enjoyed it very, very much. And then from there, I went to my county regiment, which was the Northamptonshire Regiment.
Now, let me just ask you, at this point, did you feel that you were really English? I mean, were you integrated, or did you feel you were still a refugee?
Very much English. Into the British forces. I didn't care whether there were any other refugees there. I was in the British forces. So, in the Northamptonshire Regiment, I did the infantry training. Very tough. And just before the passing out parade, just before the end, you know, with music, with all the pomp and circumstance, the commanding officer called me in. The sergeant had talked to him and said, you're officer material. We think we're officer material. Have you thought about it? I said, yes, I have thought about it, but not very much. Mm-hmm. And he said, you know, you can't really do it, you're not British born. So I said, well, okay, if those are the rules. Well, he said, there are some field promotions, but we don't take, you know, I mean, you have to be British born. I said, okay, if that's what it is. And I saw the commanding officer, and he said, you know, you ought to change your name, because you'll soon be in the field. And I would not go with a name like yours.
Which was Goodman at that time.
Goodman, G-U-T-T-M-A-N. So he said, have you thought of a name? I said, well, you know, I suppose Goodman. He said, good enough. It sounds wonderful. From then on, I was Benny. Nobody knew my name.
Benny?
Benny. Ben, Benji, Benny. Always, right through. Anyway, after that passing out parade, there were still 3 or 4 days left before we went for further training, either tank training or further infantry training. There arrived a contingent of guards, recruiters, from the Brigade of Guards. There was a Welsh Guard, there was the Coldstream Guards, the Grenadier, the number, the Scots Guard. And they looked through our records, and I guess they looked through mine too, and my name was called. And they said, we're looking for first-class shots or marksmen. We're looking for people that are 5'9". We're looking for people that have done this assault course and that assault course, and all these different things. We're looking at training record, and you would qualify. Do you want to volunteer for the Guards? We've lost a tremendous number of people in Italy. I said, yes, 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 absolutely, Brigade of Guards. And that was it. He tested us, we had an interview and all kinds of different things. And within a week I was at Purbright Camp for further training, and now it really began. I thought I'd been trained for the infantry, now it really began. From 5 in the morning with a swim and a run, and it was just unbelievable.
So you're really conditioned.
It was, I felt tough. God, I feel tough. And so that was wonderful. They assigned us to the Coldstream Guards. My friend Archie and I went to the Coldstream Guard. They said, all right, you're going to the Coldstream Guard. So that was a great honor. I mean, I could hardly believe it. So we were the first Jews since the 16th century.
Really? How did you know that?
There had been one, I asked them. They looked through the records. There had been one, Gerald Green, quite a famous author. He served fairly briefly, and he wrote, they died with their boots clean. And that was it. So we were the only 2 Jews. They didn't care, really. They, you know, you do the training, you're assigned, and that's it.
Now, this is when you mentioned that you had dog tag that it said Jewish on it.
Yes.
And that was issued when you first went into the infantry.
And you kept that.
Now
you weren't allowed to tamper with government property. You couldn't change, you couldn't do it, but I did.
You scratched it out? Or?
I scratched it hard. Once I went in the field, once I got over there. And I put on the atheist. And I couldn't quite bring myself to put Baptist. You know, it just didn't feel quite right. And I had a friend who was an atheist in the army, who sort of became pals, and he always said, I'm an atheist, and you should write atheist on there. And I said, yeah, good idea.
So the others in the army, they were aware that you were Jewish?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Not, I mean, I didn't tell them every day, you know, but they knew, and strangely...
How did they know?
Well, because we mentioned it. We mentioned it. And Archie has quite a strong accent. I didn't have much of it. I'm a mimic. I mean, I can change accents very quickly.
Because you don't have a British accent now.
No, no. So, except occasionally, you know, there's something. But it isn't really. So, again, I assume it, I live in a place for 3 hours, and I've got it. So, then church parade was always difficult, of course, because you were left there, you know, because they didn't have Jew on the list at all, just didn't exist.
But did you feel that you were treated differently because of that?
Never, never, never. This is why I say I never cared that they made dumb remarks about Jews. From time to time, you know, generally, without thinking, I Jewed him. And so on. But they don't mean much by that. It's, you know, it gives you a jolt. But that's it. And they never put me at disadvantage at all. I did everything the others did. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but you know, that's in the course of things, that's what happens.
Now let me just pause for a minute. Okay, go ahead.
Well, that was the army, and eventually, of course, I went to Normandy and was wounded. I was in the hospital for 7 months, recovering, and had a great time in the hospital because I didn't have any visitors, I didn't have any relatives, didn't have anybody around. And so I was visited by all kinds of kind people who worked at factories around the area of Bromsgrove near Birmingham, where I was in the hospital, and they were wonderful to me. The nurses were just magnificent. I was at death's door at one time. I was told I was die that night. That nurse was supposed to go off duty at 7 p.m. She held my hand all night till daybreak. I can't say enough about the British people in wartime. And they were good to me. They were very, very good to me, and more than good to me, especially in the hospital when I recovered. And all in all, I would say that that my stay in England was a great gain to me. I became tough. I greatly value the stiff upper lip that was given to me, I think, and I try to maintain it. I think I learned a great deal through all the experiences of the Kindertransport, the transport itself, my life in England, and eventually I came to the States, and it is that stiff upper lip, I think, that put me through graduate school. Luckily, I got a job as a professor and taught for 30 years. No regrets, except some of the relatives that perished. But otherwise, I really have no regrets. I had a wonderful life. Married an English girl, met in the army. She was in the ATS. We met at Buckingham Palace, right by Buckingham Palace, where I was stationed for a long time, doing public duties at the palace as a guard. And she worked at the War Office. It's a good life. I have no regrets.
What would you, if you could pass on something to future generations that you've learned from your experiences, your lifetime, what would you want that to be?
Be meticulous. Learn. You can learn from everything. Good experiences, bad experiences. It's the whole pattern of life that you develop through the years. And I think we became tough.
What do you mean by being meticulous?
Be meticulous, be punctual. Most refugees are extremely punctual. I've talked to people who stand around 10 minutes before the gong for dinner. I think being meticulous, be punctual. You can get on in life when people depend on you and know they can depend on you. And they depend on you if you are reliable. And reliability means keeping your word, your promise. And I think it's important. We learned that the hard way. No allowances were made for us, none. And I think it helped us in many ways. Now, whether we were brought up tough or not, I think my mother was tough. She made sure that we wrote thank you notes within 24 hours of getting a present. And I still do that. So, you learn a lot. I learned that it's good to fight for what you believe in, and fight hard. I'm not a pacifist. I did believe that the Nazis had to be destroyed, and I felt strongly that I had to be a part of it. I felt the pull all the time, as I say, not a day went by when I didn't think about joining, from the age of 17. And it wasn't so much ideological, I just knew that there was no other way than to go at them, destroy them. There was no other way. They were well equipped. They were fanatic. And I fought against some fanatics, absolute fanatics, that wouldn't give up a machine gun. We had to go around and then throw grenades at them, and there was no other way. They were fanatics. They had to be beaten. And I felt I can't sit on the farm and let other people do the fighting. It's my war, primarily. So I was thankful for all the experiences I've had, believe me.
Well, thank you.